Chapter 10, Dynamic Change, Economic Fluctuations, and the ADAS Model. Anticipated and unanticipated change. Understanding macroeconomics, our game plan. Anticipated changes are fully expected by economic participants. Decision makers have time to adjust to them before they occur. Unanticipated changes catch people by surprise. Factors that shift aggregate demand. The aggregate demand or AD curve indicates the quantity of goods and services that will be demanded at alternative price levels. An increase in aggregate demand, a shift of the AD curve to the right, indicates that decision makers will purchase a larger quantity of goods and services at each different price level. A decrease in aggregate demand, a shift of the AD curve to the left, indicates that decision makers will purchase a smaller quantity of goods and services at each different price level. The following factors will cause a shift in aggregate demand outward and inward. An increase or decrease in real wealth, a decrease or increase in the real interest rate, an increase in the optimism or pessimism of businesses and consumers about future economic conditions, an increase or decline in the expected rate of inflation, higher or lower real incomes abroad, a reduction or increase in the exchange rate value of the nation's currency. When we're taking a look at shift in the aggregate demand, an increase in real wealth, such as would result from a stock market boom, would increase aggregate demand, shifting the entire curve to the right. In contrast, a reduction in real wealth decreases aggregate demand, shifting AD to the left. Aggregate demand and consumer optimism and pessimism. The Consumer Sentiment Index for 1978 to 2019 is shown here. This measure attempts to capture consumers' optimism and pessimism regarding the future of the economy. Moves toward optimism tend to increase AD, while moves toward pessimism tend to decrease AD. Note how the Consumer Sentiment Index turns down prior to or during recessions, which are represented on the graphic here by these shaded areas. Questions for thought. Number 1, explain how and why each of the following factors would influence current aggregate demand in the United States. A, an increased fear of recession. B, an increased fear of inflation. C, the rapid growth of real income in Canada and Western Europe. D, a reduction in the real interest rate. E, a decline in housing prices. Or F, a higher price level. Be careful. Shifts in aggregate supply. Long and short run aggregate supply. When considering shifts in aggregate supply, it is important to distinguish between the long and short run. Shifts in LRAS, a long run change in aggregate supply, indicates that it will be possible to achieve and sustain a larger rate of output. A shift in the long run aggregate supply curve will cause the short run aggregate supply curve to shift in the same direction. Shifts in LRAS are an alternative way of indicating there has been a shift in the economy's production possibilities curve. Shifts in SRAS, changes that temporarily alter the productive capability of an economy, will shift the SRAS curve, but not the LRAS curve. Shifts in aggregate supply, factors that increase or decrease LRAS. Increase or decrease in the supply of resources, improvement, deterioration in technology and productivity, institutional changes that increase or reduce efficiency of resource use, factors that increase or decrease SRAS, a decrease or increase in resource prices, hence production costs, a reduction or increase in expected inflation, and favorable or unfavorable supply shocks such as good or bad weather, or a reduction or increase in the world price of a key imported resource. In the shifts in LRAS and SRAS, such factors as an increase in the stock of capital or an improvement in technology will expand an economy's potential output and shift LRAS to the right. Note that when the LRAS curve shifts, so too does SRAS. Such factors as a reduction in resource prices or favorable weather would shift SRAS to the right. Note that here the LRAS curve will remain constant. Questions for thought. Which of the following would be the most likely to shift the long-run aggregate supply curve, LRAS, to the left? A. Unfavorable weather conditions that reduce the size of this year's grain harvest. B. An increase in labor productivity as the result of improved computer technology and expansion in the internet. C. An increase in the cost of security as the result of terrorist activities. Question 2. How would an increase in the economy's production possibilities influence the LRAS? Steady economic growth and anticipated changes in long-run aggregate supply. The impact of steady economic growth, expansions in the productive capacity of the economy, like those resulting from capital formation or improvements in technology, shifts an economy's LRAS curve to the right. When growth of the economy is steady and predictable, it will be anticipated by decision makers. Anticipated increases in output, LRAS, need not disrupt macroeconomic equilibrium. Shifts in the long-run aggregate supply, you have to consider the impact of capital formation or technological advancement on the economy. Both LRAS and SRAS increase, full employment output expands, and a sustainable higher level of real output is the result. And we can see that in the charts here. Unanticipated changes and market adjustments. In the short run, output will deviate from full employment capacity as prices in the goods and services market deviate from the price level that people expected. Unanticipated changes in aggregate demand often lead to such deviations. The impact of unanticipated increase in AD or aggregate demand. Initially, the strong demand and higher price level in the goods and services market will temporarily improve the profit margins. Output will increase, the rate of unemployment will drop below the natural rate, and output will temporarily exceed the economy's long-run potential. With time, however, contracts will be modified and resource prices will rise and return to their competitive position relative to product prices. Once this happens, output will recede to the economy's long-run potential. Unanticipated increase in AD for the short run. In response to an unanticipated increase in AD for goods and services, prices rise and output will increase, temporarily exceeding full employment capacity. With time, resource market prices, including labor, rise due to the strong demand. Higher costs reduce SRAS to SRAS2. Reduce SRAS1 to SRAS2. In the long run, a new equilibrium at a higher price level, P110, and output consistent with long-run potential will occur. So the increase in demand only temporarily expands output. Unanticipated decrease in aggregate demand. Weak demand and lower prices in the goods and services market will reduce profit margins. Many firms will incur losses. Firms will reduce output, the unemployment rate will rise above the natural rate, and output will temporarily fall short of the economy's long-run potential. With time, long-term contracts will be modified. Eventually, lower resource prices and lower real interest rates will direct the economy back to long-run equilibrium, but this may be a lengthy and painful process. Unanticipated decreases in AD short run. The short run impact of an unanticipated reduction in AD will be a decline in output and a lower price level. Temporarily, profit margins decline, output falls, and unemployment rises above its natural rate. In the long run, both weak demand and excess supply in the resource market lead to lower resource prices, including labor, resulting in an expansion in SRAS. A new equilibrium at a lower price level, P90, and an output consistent with long-run potential will result. Unanticipated changes in short-run aggregate supply can catch people by surprise. Thus, they are often referred to as supply shocks. A supply shock is an unexpected event that temporarily increases or decreases aggregate supply. The impact of unanticipated increases in SRAS. As SRAS shifts to the right, output temporarily exceeds the economy's long-run potential. Since the temporarily favorable supply conditions cannot be counted on in the future, the economy's long-term production capacity will not be altered. If individuals recognize that they will be unable to maintain their current high level of income, they will increase their saving. Lower interest rates and additional capital formation may result. Consider an unanticipated temporary increase in SRAS, such as may result from a bumper crop from good weather. The increase in aggregate supply would lead to lower price level and an increase in current GDP. As the supply conditions are temporary, LRAS persists. The impact of unanticipated decreases in SRAS. As SRAS shifts to the left, output falls short of economy's long-run potential temporarily. If an unfavorable supply shock is expected to be temporary, long-run aggregate supply will be unaffected. Households may reduce their current saving and dip into past savings. In the supply shock resource market, suppose there is an adverse supply shock, perhaps as a result of a crop failure or a sharp increase in the world price of a major resource such as oil. Here we show the impact in the resource market. Prices rise from PR to PR prime. PR to PR prime. As shown here, the higher resource prices shift SRAS to the left in the product market. In the short run, price level rises to P110 and output falls to Y2. What happens in the long run depends on whether the supply shock is temporary or permanent. Even if the adverse supply shock is temporary, resource prices will eventually fall in the future, shifting SRAS2 back to SRAS1, returning equilibrium to E1. If the adverse supply factor is permanent, the productive potential of the economy will shrink. LRAS shifts left, and Y2 becomes YF2, and E2 will become the long-run equilibrium. Price level inflation in the ADAS model. The basic ADAS model focuses on how the general level of prices influences the choices of business decision makers. If the price level in the product market changes, this indicates that the prices change relative to other markets. This structure implicitly assumes that the actual and expected rates of inflation are initially zero. When inflation is present, this model can be recast in a dynamic setting. When actual and expected rates of inflation are equal. When the actual and expected rate of inflation are equal, inflation will be built into long-term contracts. Prices will rise in both resource and product markets, but the relative price between the two will be unchanged. An actual rate of inflation that is less than anticipated is the equivalent of a reduction in the price level. As a result, firms will incur losses and reduce output. An actual rate of inflation that is greater than anticipated is the equivalent of an increase in the price level. Profits will be enhanced and firms will expand output. Unanticipated changes, recessions, and booms. The ADAS model and instability. The ADAS model indicates that unanticipated changes will disrupt macro equilibrium and result in economic instability. Recessions occur because prices in the goods and services market are low relative to the cost of production and resource prices. The two causes of recessions are, number one, unanticipated reductions in aggregate demand, and two, unfavorable supply shocks. An unsustainable boom occurs when prices in the goods and services market are high relative to resource prices and other costs. The two causes of booms are unanticipated increases in aggregate demand, and number two, favorable supply shocks. Two forces directing the economy back to equilibrium. The ADAS model indicates that there are two forces that will help direct an economy back to long-run equilibrium. One is change in real resource prices. During a recession, real resource prices will tend to fall because the demand for resources will be weak and the rate of unemployment high. During a boom, real estate prices will tend to rise as demand for resources will be strong and the unemployment rate will be low. Changes in real estate interests. During a recession, real estate rates will tend to decline because of the weak demand for investment. The lower interest rates will stimulate aggregate demand and help direct the economy back to full-time employment. During a boom, real estate rates will tend to rise because of the strong demand for investment. The higher rates will retard AD and help direct the economy back to full employment. The macro adjustment process. If output is temporarily less than long-run potential, YF sub prime, falling interest rates will shift AD from AD1 to AD2, while lower resource prices decrease production costs and therefore increase SRAS, and so direct output toward its full employment potential. Output may exceed or fall short of the economy's full employment capacity in the short run. If output is temporarily greater than long-run potential, YF, higher interest rates will reduce AD while higher resource prices increase production costs and thereby reduce SRAS, directing output toward its full employment potential. Again, output may exceed and fall short of the economy's full employment capacity in the long run. Expansions and recessions, the historical record. With the macro adjustment process in mind, let's take a look at the historical record of expansions and recessions. During the past 6 decades, economic expansions have been far more lengthy than recessions. The depth and severity of the recession that started in December 2007 highlights the issue of economic instability and recovery from the recession. And we can take a look here of periods of expansion and periods of recession, and we can see the number of lengths in months for both. We can see that expansion far exceeded that of recession in terms of the time frames for each one. The Great Recession of 2008 and 2009. What caused the boom of 2003 to 2007 and the bust of 2008 to 2009? Well, between 2002 and mid-year 2006, housing prices rose by almost 90%. Stock prices also rose rapidly. As a result, wealth expanded and AD increased, leading to economic boom. But the situation changed in the second half of 2006 because housing prices began to fall. Both mortgage default and housing foreclosure rates increased. This reduced aggregate demand. Stock prices began to decline in October 2007, and they plunged during 2008. This also reduced wealth and aggregate demand. During 2007 and the first half of 2008, crude oil and other energy prices soared, and this generated an unanticipated reduction in SRAS. These forces led to a sharp reduction in consumer and investor confidence, further reducing AD. The reduction in both AD and SRAS reduced output and employment, just as the AD-AS model implies. Changes in stock and housing prices during expansions and recessions. Both stock and housing prices generally rise prior to and during expansions. This leads to increases in AD. In contrast, stock and housing prices generally fall prior to and during recessions, and this reduces aggregate demand. The wealth effects associated with the swings in stock and housing prices are a contributing factor to the ups and downs of the business cycle. Note, the reduction in housing prices for the 2008-2009 recession were far greater than other recessions. Stock price reductions were also substantial. These price reductions increased the severity of the recent downturn. Questions for thought. Suppose consumers and investors suddenly become more pessimistic about the future and therefore decide to reduce their consumption and investment spending. How will the market economy adjust to this increase in pessimism? 2. If the general level of prices is higher than business decision makers anticipated when they entered into long-term contracts for raw materials and other resources, profit margins will be abnormally low and the economy will fall into recession. Is this statement true or false? Number 3, which of the following would be most likely to throw the United States economy into a recession? A reduction in transaction costs as a result of the growth and development of the internet. B, an unanticipated reduction in the world price of oil. Will the impact of this factor differ between oil producing and oil consuming states? And the next one, an unanticipated reduction in aggregate demand as a result of a sharp decline in consumer confidence. 4. During the first half of 2008, the world price of oil soared while stock and housing prices plunged. Within the framework of the ADAS model, how would these two changes influence the U.S. economy? Explain the expected impact on output and price level. Number 5. When actual output is less than the economy's full employment level of output, how will real resource prices and real interest rates adjust? Construct the AD, SRAS, and LRAS curves for an economy experiencing A, full employment equilibrium, B, an economic boom, or C, a recession. Thank you. This is the end of chapter 10.